So I will talk about planning just to finish up that section. And I said before, I will talk about risk and risk identification, risk assessment. It's an area I'm personally very interested in too, because there's a lot of data and data analytics involved in there. But let's do planning first. And those of you, a couple of people, as you know by now, on this side of the room are heavy-duty project management gurus, have taken classes. There are multiple institutes that deal with project management, PMI being one of the big ones, different associations, certifications, and so forth. So I will not kill you with detailed slide with all the different documents and this can be done, because that would be way too much. But having said that, I will show you what the resources are, right? So if you're interested in, hey, I need a certain planning document, these website links have a lot of those, right? But it would not really be a great educational experience if I just showed you, okay, here are 500 different templates you can be using for this and this and this, right? So that's not really good from a teaching perspective, but it certainly does exist. But I do want to talk about planning. I'd like to get your feedback on planning, and Muta-san and Muafak weren't here yesterday, so in the exercise, I think you were briefed or debriefed on what happened there, right? So planning was a big issue yesterday in the building constructions that you did, well, the lack thereof, right? So keep in mind that project planning is important, not just at the beginning, but in my mind, it's a continuous activity throughout the process. And what I've learned the hard way too is you don't throw good money after bad. Sometimes you just pull the plug and press the big red reset button and start from scratch. And I could tell yesterday, none of the groups, maybe you guys here, but by and large, people are reluctant to do that and just kind of say, hey, you know, we invested time, we invested money, but you know the concept of sunk cost, right? You can't recover some of the costs. Sometimes it's just simply better to start from scratch. So let me give you maybe a little bit of a philosophical approach to product planning, right? I've been involved in a number of pretty large projects, right? And initially when you start a large project, things look very messy. A lot of teams, a lot of team members, right? A lot of different types of data, planning processes, timelines, right? All this kind of stuff. And I always see it as sort of my first challenge as a team, that is to get structure behind the project, right? So develop processes, develop structures that actually help you make it a successful project. I told you in the very beginning, I love photography. I have the same approach in photography. Does anybody know what this is? Penguins, yes. So these penguins, they're not all on the image, about 10,000 of them on South Georgia Island. Right? It's deep down off of the coast, well, not off of the coast, 2 hours away by boat off of South America. Right? These are king penguins. The adults are black and white. The brown ones are called oakum boys. They are between 6 and 12 months old. Right? As you can see photographically, it's interesting, but it's also very messy, right? I mean, you're trying to, as a photographer, see what structures are there in there? What do we focus on, right? What do we do first, right? So, you know, this kind of stuff. Yeah, let's focus on a small section. Let's focus on something, solve a piece of the puzzle first, and then look at the other pieces of the puzzle, right? So I call that, when I have the first initial team meetings, right, the quest for structure, right? Take all those, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds of post-it notes, the brainstorming you've done, and put some structure behind all this information that you have at your hand, right? We've looked at different sort of mental models you can be using, right, to put some structure behind this. And at some level, it's quite easy, right? There's the planning, and there's the execution, and there's sort of a debrief session, right? So always start with sort of very sort of big buckets, high buckets, and then kind of fill in the little puzzle pieces as you go along. I put a big red star on this slide, right? Those of you who are struggling, and I've had multiple questions on what should be in our project, this can be your template, right? Use this as a template and simply look at, so what are important components in a project, and see, do they pertain to the project that you're working on? Have you looked, for example, at external factors? Have you looked at the competition, right? Have you looked at any legal requirements that you may have to look at, right? So use this or something like this as a template, because it's fairly high level, right? And you can sort of see if you have at least thought through the big buckets that you should be thinking through, right? So it's an ongoing process, obviously, but you must have some structure, right? My initial projects, right, I learned that the hard way too, were just semi-structured, to put it mildly, right? So put it charitably, rather, right? And I found as fun as not having structure sometimes can be in life, right? From a business perspective, you must have processes in place, right? That is just very important, right? We talked about goals multiple times, and I can't tell you how many times I fought battles about goals and objectives, right? Because people many times just want to do stuff, right? And I tell them, how do you measure progress, right? So that's what I put in red there. Yeah, if you don't know where you're going, right? If you don't know what your goals are, how can you measure process, right? All roads will lead you there. So if you don't know what the B point is, both as an overall project, but also in terms of subcomponents of the project, I mean, you cannot really implement processes, you cannot really implement strategies and tactics behind that, right? So the B part, right, the end part, where you actually end up, I always like to start there, right? Because we have clients, right? We're a consulting company. We need to understand what our clients actually want to have at the end of the day, right? So we push them hard to articulate what deliverables, what goals they actually want to have accomplished. So if there's any problem, we can say, this is what you said, these are the goals, and we delivered on them, right? So that part is extremely important to simply understand, at the end of the day, what is it that we need to deliver at the back end here that you, the clients, tell us would make it a successful project, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the most important part, because we want to stay in business, right? So happy client is certainly very important to us, right? So do keep that in mind, big picture, sort of putting structure behind this, right? And don't get me wrong, I made the same mistakes that I think most of us do. You just kind of start writing things up, but sometimes you forget that you lose the sight of the forest just by virtue of the many trees, or in that example, the many, many penguins, right? So let me just highlight a couple of different concepts here. And one, in my mind at least, important concept is WBS, right? It's an acronym, right? Yes, it's a consulting term, project management consulting term. What does WBS stand for? Okay, work breakdown structure. Work breakdown structure. What does that mean? Plain English. Okay?
Just breaking down the big tasks or big activities into more controllable, manageable tasks.
Okay.
So it can be managed more, with more controllable time, scope, and
okay. Perfect. Okay, I'll give you some examples of our projects in a minute. Can you guys give me an example of one of your projects? A quick one, not a big one that takes half an hour, but give me an example.
Well, we are now doing a gold project. It's worth about 500 million, and it is big. So from the plot plan, we divide the project into WBS eventually, and based on the process as well. So it has two dimensions: geographical location and process needs. We are ending up with about 29 WBSs.
29, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was $500 million, the project size, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So WBS, work breakdown. Keep going, sorry.
So each WBS relates to another WBS. So the process will come out from one to the other. Integration, interfaces between these two WBSs need to be identified.
Yep.
Time-wise, cost-wise, availability of raw material, contractor and resources, so on and so forth.
Yep. Whose task is this? Whose task is this? Yeah. Project manager? Team? Yeah. Yeah.
All the team members involved in?
Okay, all team members? Yeah, okay, all right. Okay. Okay. So in that case, 500 million, how many people were working on that WBS? Wolfgang?
So far, we had about 15 people.
Yeah. All right, so let me show you an example. so I won't go through the sort of all details here, but let me show you an example that I've gone through before, right? So one, a very easy one, and one that was a more complex one, right? So you have the different levels. This is the big picture, the project. Here are the deliverables, sub-deliverables, work packages, right? And the work projects, I'm not sure if you had 6 levels or 10 levels, right? But this can go really, really deep depending how big the project is, right?
Well, we start from the big one, and if I can go into details. So we start with the function, first of all. So let's say we have engineering, procurement, construction, and commissioning, and then handover. If we take one sub, engineering for each WBS, right? And then it goes down to discipline. Discipline, that means is it civil, structural, architecture, electrical, mechanical, piping, so on and so forth. And then in that level you have about 9. And at each level you will have system, subsystem related to it. Each system will have subsystem. Subsystem will have some certain breakdown. So it's like a tree that is building up. And then each final WBS, work packages, each one will have a cost center related to it, a time duration related to it, and then we measure it with milestones, performance guarantees for quality, capacity of that, certain activity.
Okay, perfect.
And then, can I add?
Go ahead.
All the functional departments. So you will have the checks for the quality, checks for the safety, checks for the engineering deliverables, is it there or not? It checks for all the change orders, technical queries, request for information, punch items that are created. So each subsystem or work packages will have a dossier that need to be really prepared very well in a very early stage. So it's like you start from the end, build up your schedule, and then you start again running the Monte Carlo, so the P50, P80, and then so on and so forth.
Okay. All right. So let me give you a couple of examples from that we have been involved in. Right. So I talked about the ideation across groups example yesterday. In a sense, it's a very easy project, right? I exaggerated a little bit. Yes, it's 2 days for the actual work, but there actually was a bit of planning involved, right? I call it short, fairly non-complex, right? A couple of weeks, maybe 6 or 7 of us being involved, right? So the project was called Ideation across different groups. Client was Microsoft. What did they want? Again, I pushed super duper hard on the client. What do you want to have? 5 ideas, right? 5 ideas we can take to upper management from these discussions with consumers. Okay, specifically, what does that mean? We want some video clips. We want specific description of these particular ideas, right? So again, we just kind of start at the top and then we sort of come up with the specifics, right? So we actually know what exactly we have to deliver. I also talked yesterday about the example that was a huge project, right? That could have been $1 billion new business, consumer software description, right? Where many, many different types of people were involved, right? So there were many different, excuse me, WBSs involved. This was just one, the marketing piece, right? So we looked at different customer segments, right? Different types of software users, right? Different people in different countries. We looked at different marketing strategies, right? We looked at P&L models, right? The client also wanted to find out, okay, if we do this consumer software description, we need to understand P&L. What are the ongoing costs? What are the fixed costs, right? So we had to deliver on that as well. Then we bubbled it even further down into more detail. What does that mean, consumer segments? How big are they, right? What is the profile? What is their size? What is their value from a business perspective, right? Segment 1, segment 2. What is their lifetime value? If you look at subscription, year 1, year 2, or year 3, right? So again, we worked on that. So the easy example, like the simple one, only went to 4 levels. This one here, over almost a 2-year time period, we were levels at 15 or 16, right? It was just more detail, more detail, more detail, more detail, right? So again, I challenge you when you work on E-class projects, Think about that, right? So what are the WBSs, right? So the work breakout structures. Is there one? Are there multiple ones? What exactly do you want to deliver? Again, it's a project, right? It's not a business plan that you're writing, but what do you want to deliver at a high level and also at a very detailed level, right? If somebody were to pay you for this, right? If you have a real client, right? It's not your own restaurant, but somebody else's. It's a project. It's not your own cleaning business. It's somebody else's, right? What do you actually need to deliver to that client who has commissioned you to actually do this, right? So again, obviously, the more complex a project is, the more levels you have, the deeper levels that you have. And why do you do all this? Control, right? What Muafak was saying, cost centers, right? Control that you have over this, monitoring that you can manage the process. And you need to have processes in place to have successful projects. You have to be able to look at costs, right? And have that breakdown, WBS 1, 2, 3. Was it 29? What was the number? Yeah, 29, that's certainly a lot. I've never had that many, right? But in this case, in the previous example, right, so we had the subscription. We had engineers, right, who actually worked on the different software packages. We had marketing involved, right? We had procurement involved because fulfilling all this stuff actually is a very complex challenge, right? To get the payments from people, right, and collect the money, right? Termination, right? If people don't want to be part of the subscription anymore, what do you do? Mohammed, go ahead.
I guess I want to ask, what is the P&L method?
Oh, P&L, profit and loss, sorry. Profit and loss, right? So if you look at a particular segment, right, obviously what profits can we generate for that segment and what are the costs associated with that segment? Can we reach it, right? So from a marketing perspective, right, segments is always sort of how can you reach them, how can you find them, how can you address them with marketing messages, and what is the value, in other words, what money can you extract from those segments, right? So profit and loss, right? So anyway, so decomposition, right? So again, taking your big picture project and decomposing it into smaller bits, right? So again, this is an example, right, that you have here, right? So I took the consumer software subscription, right? I called it the waterfall model, right? We tested this, we retested this, we retested this, right? So of 1,000 people, how many are actually interested in this new model, right? Where you're not buying software once a year, once every other year, but you're subscribing to it, you're getting automatic updates. Again, this was 1999, 2000. Today, this is all boring, right? Because almost everything is like this today, but back then, it was brand new, right? Back then, it was a DVD model. You would buy a box, you would go to a store, order it online. Today, this obviously has become the norm, right? But then you waterfall it down, right? So you get into more and more detail. Right? This is just kind of the piece that dealt with the more detailed data analytics. We did RFPs, multiple vendors. We contacted them. We selected vendors, right? So each, right? So you went down there to, excuse me, the different levels. You had more detail and more specificity, right? And again, you know this as a human being, right? When you work in a business, people want specificity. What do you want me? What do you mean? You want me to work on customer satisfaction? I don't even know what that means, right? So you want to have more detail that allows your employees to actually deliver specifics rather than very, very broad goals, right? So this is, again, is a WBS for software development, right? So again, that's an area I know well, right? So you can look at that conceptual model, right? The level 1, right? The level 2, the level 3, the level 4, level 5, and level 6, right? Their cost, budgets, their approval, there's testing, right? So this is specific a model that we developed specifically targeted at software development, right? So at a high level, right, obviously there's a lot of detail behind it, but we need to have a big picture conceptual model to present to our employees so we can actually have a reasonable discussion about what's involved, right? Software development, right? So the initiation, the planning, designing, the coding, right? The deployment. What are all the different activities involved? And again, you start with the big buckets, and then you populate the details under each one of them, right? As you kind of go down in these different levels, right? So it was fun stuff, but as I told you several times now, sort of 15 or so years ago, this whole industry, right? It was pretty. How should I put this? Chaotic, unstructured, right? There wasn't enough, in my mind at least, being a fairly linear thinker, not much structure behind it. So I was trying to sort of implement this Right? Let's use levels. Right? Let's use these tools that had been around at that point in time out of project management for quite some time and apply them to software development as well. Right? It's not easy. Coders, all they want to do is code. They love coding. Right? They don't really want to talk about this kind of stuff. What do you mean? What's the level 1? What's the level 2? They just want to sit and write code. Right? So the buy-in on that wasn't always trivial. Okay. Then you have, and again, I just kind of picked a few highlights in here. And again, this is something I want to see in your projects, right? You typically have more than one person involved, right? Who's doing what? Very mundane, right? But having something like this, a responsibility matrix, so people know what they're supposed to be doing, right, is important, right? So that you can evaluate them, that you can monitor them, that you can sort of help them deploy the different strategies, right? So we always used fairly simple approaches on a WBS level, on a team functional level, to figure out and tell people who is working on what, right? So again, think about your projects, right? Who is working on advertising? Who is working on any social media stuff, right? If you're marketing-based project, right? People need to know what they need to do. Sounds very mundane, yes it does, but having just something like this in place, right? So we actually made people print this out, right? Post it above their desk so they actually knew, hey, somebody would come to me and say, should I be doing this and this? Well, look at the damn matrix, right? Is this part of your job or is it not, right? People need to have this for them to actually do what they're supposed to be doing and not something else, right? So that was the planning. So I'm not going to sort of summarize. That's kind of a sort of text summary, relatively boring, but do use some of these templates, kind of these models to fill in some of the missing gaps on your projects. And otherwise, I will talk about risk management next. As I said, coming out of mathematics, coming out of sort of probabilities, I love probabilities. This is always a topic I sort of liked a lot. I have found over time not all of my colleagues share that passion, right? Most of them find that relatively boring, right? But even in particular today, with the amount of data that we have at hand, sort of using probabilistic models is even more fun than it used to be back then, right? And it's not all about math, right? So let me talk about risks first, the identification of risks, and then some methods, qualitative and quantitative methods that can help you identify and prioritize risks. So let me go around the room, right? You guys tell me something, a risk in your projects that you know of. Anything. Anybody. Go ahead.
For me, like it was the wetness season. So myself actually, like during my project, I get, flu or summer cold. So it was just a struggle.
Okay, so great example, right? So cold, people get colds, employees are out sick, big impact on the clinic, right? Is it clinic, hospital, it's the same thing? Or? Yes. Okay, all right, somebody else. A risk that you know about, Maha.
For calligraphy, I'm watching tools from 50 can be really cost high.
Okay, so importing and the associated costs, all right? Who else? Go ahead, Rehab, right?
Having everyone check maybe a risk can come apart. I haven't hired a second chef or someone who will support the first chef. So that may be a risk if he got sick or something like that.
Yep. Okay. I think I mentioned that a day or two ago, several friends who own restaurants, right? Medium size, right? 5 or 6 chefs. If one is sick, they're screwed. I mean, if one person is not there, it's very, very difficult, right? So if you own that kind of a business where you have a few very key employees, it's a challenge. It's a big risk, right? A server, relatively easy to replace. A chef, in particular, if he or she specializes on something, it's a challenge. Okay, Hiba, do you have something, a risk that you have identified for your project?
Maybe the demand for my project is not really high.
Okay, consumer demand, right? So, okay.
For me, getting the last from the government for the products, especially the will be first safety.
Yeah.
So to get the last from the minister, for experience, quite handy risk.
Yeah.
And major risk.
Now, I'm not sure what you're working on, so do you have something? Yeah, okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Sarah, besides chefs?
Besides chefs,
Yep.
because of the rent for that area, because it's too expensive, especially in the mathematics quarter.
Okay. Risks, either from real life or projects, it's up to you guys. Mudasan, tell me about a big risk that you've encountered in a recent project.
The submittals of project materials.
Uh-huh.
Slate,
Okay. Duka?
I think the time,
Meaning, how is that a risk? Time for what?
how do you put the time in new project?
Yeah. Well, Wafak, go ahead.
I think it's the duration. How to identify the duration for an activity. Maybe sometimes the people are very optimistic, put something really not realistic to be implemented. Yeah. Okay. I can think of late changes in the scope of work and just before starting the execution.
Okay. Mohammed,
for my project in for the facility management.
you pick it. Can be a project or your.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We have facing many big risks, like limited budget for our company. Also lack of qualified contractors to handle this kind of, big contract. It's a giant contract.
And all of you obviously listen to what the other people have to say because it may pertain to your project as well, right? That's always a good learning experience, right? So risk obviously is an issue, right? So I'll focus on sort of some methods that you can actually use to identify them and to measure them, right? Because that's sort of what I'm pretty big on. At the end of the day, right? Risk has an impact on schedules. Risk has an impact on potential impact on performance, on value, on costs, right? So it's a no-brainer, obviously, that's important, right? So let me jump into identification and measurement of these risks. Question before that, what do you think is, how should I ask this question? If you look around at your place of work, if you look around in your families, your circle of friends, how much variability is there when you look at the risk tolerance that those people have? Yeah. So let's say 10-point scale. 10, I'm a super duper risk taker. Who is a 9 or 10? Who considers himself, herself to be a risk taker? That can be in the personal life or professional life. Muwafaq, personally or professionally, or both? Professionally? Okay, so fairly high. Who is the opposite? I'd rather not take risks, professionally or personally. So 1 or 2. So most of you are somewhere in the middle? Right? Okay. Right. It's a normal distribution, right? So it's, yeah, most of you should be somewhere in the middle, right? So, but again, it's something that's important to recognize, right? When you work on teams, that people have different tolerances for risk, right? I mean, some people, again, I've started multiple companies, so I think there's something inherent in people who start companies that they tend to be able to take more risks, but some people just want to work for a big company and sort of sleep at night and don't have to worry about stuff, right? Which is fine too, right? So there are people who are very risk averse, there are people who are risk takers, and most people are somewhere in the middle, right? Again, that's sort of kind of mostly a normal distribution. So I do have a question, right? And I'd like you to, I'll show you the question, right? Don't talk to your neighbors. Take 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then I will raise your hands. You tell me what your answer is, right? So first question, what would you choose? Right? A $900 cash payout, you can convert it to reals, right? It doesn't matter what currency it is, right? Or you roll a dice, and you know that you have a 90% chance of winning $1,000 and a 10% chance of winning nothing. Don't talk to each other, just sort of mentally process that. What is your choice? Option 1 or option 2?
What do you mean, chance of winning 1,000? So, for the 10 cases, does it mean that I'll lose?
Yeah, 10% you lose it. You get nothing. Yeah. So roll a dice. I mean, that has. Yeah.
That's 1,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Question, or you want to? All right. Okay. Everybody had enough time to answer the question? So before I actually get to individuals, show of hands, the sure 900. Just tell me who would take the 900. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, a little bit higher, so I can. 1, 2, so it's down to 2. 3. Okay, one more time here, please. 6, 7. Right? Okay. Okay, just the counter. Pardon me?
Those 7 people are not risk takers.
Okay. So who's going for number 2? I don't want anybody to be undecided. So 2, 3, and 1. Right? Again, 1, 2, 3, 4 actually. Yeah, 4 and 1 on this side, so 5. Right? Okay. So now you can tell me why. Right? Maha, you wanted to. Sorry, apologize. Yeah. Okay. And why?
I think the 10% is not worth it for losing everything.
Yeah. All right. How about it was almost split in half? How about those of you who chose option number 2? No, I mean the split in the class was. I'm sorry, you can't see that. I should have put this. So when I took a tally, it was 7 said number 1 and 5 said number 2. Right. Okay. What is if you're very rational, right?
The probability is the second calculation is the time probability times the amount of process.
Yeah.
So I think it's high probability.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Either whatever you chose.
Clearly that option number 1 that you will guarantee to get $900. But if you will, your sunk cost will be 10%, so you will lose
Yeah. Yeah. Who does that? Yeah. A Nobel Prize has been awarded in 1979 for this work, so I'll give you a couple more examples, right, and then we'll discuss why this is important. So second example, again, don't talk to your neighbor. Let me, so this is a game, right? We have a chance of winning something, potentially $1,000, right? That was this slide right here. Now, it's so the complement, right? You know you will take a loss. It's known, right? So let's take it, Sarah. I won't tell you yet. Give me a couple of minutes, and there's no right wrong. Right? This is a measure of risk aversion, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. Right? So now it's about a loss, right? So let's not argue about what do you mean. I'm sure to lose something. Similar setup, right? Sorry, that was I didn't go down one slide. Right? Losing $900 or reals, or option 2, taking a 90% chance of losing $1,000, right? And the 10% chance, obviously, of not losing it. Digest, take a few seconds, and I'll ask you the same question in a different color. Show of hands, who would take the sure $900 loss? 1? Okay, only 1, okay. And then that makes 11, right? Yes?
Yes.
Right? Okay, so why?
There is a chance of 10% to 1.
Correct.
There,
Yeah.
in the option
And
number 1,
even the
will
chance
lose
to
anyway.
lose,
So,
Yeah.
Number one, you're losing anyway. But number two, there's a chance. Same amount, 900.
Okay. All right. So this has been done, this experiment, many, many times, right? So I'll tell you what, in general, the answers are. So again, this is what you guys said, 7 and 5, right? So almost even. But in the second case, it was, right, the clear winner, so to speak, was option number 2, right? So you probably do remember, well, I know you do know decision trees, but you also do know probabilities, right? So by far, usually, and usually the margin is a lot higher than it was in this class, 7 to 5. People in the, you can get $900 for sure versus you can get a 90% chance of winning $1,000. Most people choose option number 1. Is that rational?
Maybe rational.
Is that rational?
Yes.
Because the expected value is the same, right? 900 and 900, right? It's basic math, right? Your expectation is exactly 900.
Yeah, the probability multiples the amount.
Yeah. So why do, again, it's the expectation, is mathematics, right? You cannot argue with math. Why do most people still choose, and you guys did too, to a slight degree at least, choose option number 1? It doesn't make sense, right? The expected value, what you should expect, right, if your brain were totally wired to be a rational thinker, is exactly the same. It's 900. There's no difference between option 1 and option 2.
Yeah.
Again?
Only the first level.
Right?
The
The expected value, right, between the two options, in the first case is 900, right, because you get that for sure. In the second one, 90% chance of winning 1,000, right? So it's 0.9 times 1,000 plus 10%, 0.1 times 0, right? So the expectation in option B is 900, as it is for option 1.
This is from a probability point of view.
Correct.
But there is a chance to lose everything. Yeah.
There is, yes.
This is risk, how we measure risk.
Yeah.
But is it rational to just choose number 2? Is it rational?
The rational answer would be that if I ask 1,000 people, 500 should choose 1, 500 should choose 2, right? I've done this hundreds of times, right? I don't have the exact data, but usually overall more than 90% choose option 1 versus option 2. I'd rather take the 900 safe, right? I know I'll get it, versus taking a chance. Although again, mathematically speaking, it's exactly the same expected value, right? Right? So if you believe in economics, if you believe in probabilities, there should not be any difference, right? But people tend to behave irrationally. The theory behind that, again, Nobel Prize, 1979, it's called prospect theory, right? So I'll talk about that in a minute, and then we'll come back to project management, right? So in the second case, same thing. The expected value of the loss in each case is exactly 900, right? It's exactly 900 in both cases, right? But people don't like losses, right? People very highly unvalue, if you want to call that, losses. They just don't like them, right? So for that reason, and it's clearly reflected in your answers, almost everybody chooses option 2, right? Because people don't like to take the loss. Is that irrational? Absolutely. Because the expected value, again, is the same for both options, right? So anyway, this is called, and I'll give you some business examples here in a minute. This is called prospect theory, right? So people try very hard to avoid losses and optimize what are called sure wins, right? Optimize sure wins, right? Avoid losses and optimize sure wins, right? We've all seen this in business applications when people say, give us feedback on Facebook, right? In return, we'll let you partake in a sweepstake. Many businesses do that. Bad strategy. If they guarantee everybody a discount of, let's say, 5% on the next purchase, it's the better strategy because you're guaranteeing that discount, right? You're guaranteeing that win rather than a probabilistic, you may win or you may not win, right? So again, people tend to avoid losses, right? The corresponding loss, even the same magnitude, is perceived to be more severe than a corresponding gain in the same amount, right? So it's called loss aversion, right? We tend to overweight small probabilities. I did want to have that discussion because, again, I'm very curious about Saudi Arabia as a country and as a culture, right? Insurance in Germany, big business. People want to insure everything. I think the average number of policy types in Germany is 11 or 12, right? Homeowners, car, health, umbrella, property, whatever, right? So it's a huge number, much larger than in the US, right? And again, because Germans, even more so than if you look across countries, do not like losses, right? So they want to insure themselves against losses, even if the probability is tiny, 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 right? And we did some work for a a chain of pet clinics a couple of years ago, right? And from a marketing perspective, we were trying to exactly capitalize on that, right? So the fact that the perceived, what's going in your brain, likelihood, right, of something that's major, such as a major health problem, such as a major accident, right? So let's say a major accident that you're crippled, right? People tend to overestimate those, and the actual probability is a lot smaller, the actual probability, right? So here's the example, right? How we capitalized on that. And I felt very ambivalent about that, right? Because it felt a little bit, yes, it's marketing, understanding consumer behavior, but it felt a little bit like sort of not misleading people, right? But doing something, capitalizing on people's irrational behaviors. Cats. How many of you have a cat or a dog? 1, 2. Do you have insurance? Any type of insurance? Nothing? Right? Okay. So pet insurance, health insurance in some countries is huge. Japan, US, right? People treat their pets like babies or better than babies, right?
Are you okay, Vincent and
Uh-huh.
do you have any kids in the family? They said, no, but they have,
Yeah.
you have to.
Yeah. Yeah. You can buy the US burial insurance, or burial as in cemetery, for pets, right? So insure your pet against dying, and they have a nice spot in a cemetery, right? So again, insurance companies capitalize on that fact, right? That people do not like losses, even if the probability is tiny, 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 right? So if you look at this, right, one of them, I know it's difficult to see, right? But the marketing message is, if your cat has brain cancer, your cost on average will be about $14,000. That may be true, right? It is a lot of money, but what answer, right? I looked up the data, right? There's not much data on it available, but it's tiny, tiny, tiny. I mean, you can almost ignore it, right? You can almost ignore it, right? But that's the message, right? These are the costs, and people totally overestimate the likelihood of these events actually occurring. Travel insurance, right? And again, I don't know how that works here. If you go to an online booking portal, you book a trip, a flight, right? Typically, when I book it on a US-based site or German site, you're automatically offered trip cancellation insurance. I never take it because I know this, right? They want $100 or $200, but I know the odds of me canceling is so tiny, right? And the insurance company wants to make me believe it's actually much larger than it really is, right? So the whole marketing message is, if you cancel it, we're going to cost you at least $800, whatever. I never take it because I know that they're exactly doing this, trying to capitalize on people's aversion to risk, right? So we worked with this company. It was interesting because it felt like, do you really want to do that, or are you stretching the boundaries of what's actually ethical? But they said, it's consumer needs. If people want to pay for it, they can pay for it, right? So loss aversions, right? Looking at calculated probabilities versus mental probabilities. So we'll come back to that. I will ask you again in a few minutes, when you look at the risks that you told me about in a few minutes, right, what do you think the likelihood of those risks actually, actually is, right? What are the odds of those risks? Sorry. So here's the other example, right? I found that actually online, right? We want to hear from you. Tell us what you think, and you can win. Sweepstakes. Bad. I looked at it and I go, who advised them? Sort of, who's their marketing manager, right? That is not good marketing, right? I can bet that the participation rates, people actually giving feedback, is really, really small because you get a chance to win, right? But the participation rate would be a lot higher if you guarantee to win something, or 5% off on the next purchase, or 10% off the next purchase, right? So there are many of these examples around. So I just wanted to give that sort of a little bit of the background, that when you identify risks is only the first step, but try and get to some reasonably objective assessment of the likelihood of that risk. And I can guarantee you that most of us, including myself, are very poor when it comes to subjective assessments, right? In particular, assessments of probability of really low likelihood events, right? And of course, it depends on low likelihood events, what type of events it is. There may be legal, safety, medical implications, and so forth. Right? I'm fully aware of that. Right? But think about that. Right? When you take out insurance, when you look at a project, you're looking at different types of risks. What really is the probability of that event? Do we know something about that? Do we need to insure ourselves against it, literally with insurance or with other mechanisms? Right? So do get a pretty good prioritization of those risks. Right? So different types of risks. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, and then I want to talk about risk quantification a little bit. Right? So look at the two big buckets. Obviously, the internal risks. Right? Internal means you can control them. Right? There are also external risks. And some of what you guys mentioned, government regulations, licensing, the cost of transportation from Turkey of a product to your country, there's not much you can do about that. Right? Those are external risks that cannot be controlled. Right? You have to try and assess them, right? But they're outside of your control. Right? Yes. Yes.
Sometimes there is certain risk might be an opportunity for you. So how will measure? For example, most businessmen they put in the opportunity for, especially if you can take the case the Bitcoin currency. You cannot imagine that this day that will charge this or this is the price. So I think it's sometimes it might be a good opportunity.
Okay, let me ask the rest of the class. So currency risk, right? Whenever you have operations that span multiple countries, there's a currency risk. Is that a risk or is that an opportunity? Okay, how so? It is, of course, but how would you deal with it in your business? I mean, would you treat it as we can make money here, or would you treat it as this is a risk, we need to actually assess it, measure it, and try and do something about it? Yeah, I'm asking back to you guys. It's actually one of the examples I have later on, right? And it's a non-trivial situation. It depends. The answer always is it depends, right? So, and risk aversion is one of them, right? One of the criteria that you take into account. We have sort of, as a company, many of the projects we've done were multi-country, right? The largest number of countries for one project was 33 or 34. Huge currency risks, right? In a few cases, we got burned really, really badly because some of the currencies, Japanese yen, right, against the dollar, right? The US dollar against the euro, right? In that period of time, it actually fluctuated substantially, right? If your margins are 20%, in a 2-year project, your currency fluctuates 10%, that's not good, right? And I learned the hard way that you need to have some insurance against that. So I viewed it as a risk. I didn't view it as an opportunity. Yeah, it is, yes, yeah. And I'm not a currency manager, right? So I don't view it as an opportunity to make money. I view it as a situation where I have to have protection against that risk. So since then, from a certain amount, $500,000, we buy insurance. I mean, you can insure yourself with forwards and option contracts against currency fluctuations, right? Because it can be huge. I mean, we got burned a few times really, really badly. And yes, in a few cases, we came out ahead, right? We actually, the currencies moved in the right direction, but I was saying, this is like rolling dice.
If you
right?
win or if you gain a profit, it's gonna became as a fortunate for you, a good.
Yes, and it's happened a few times, right? But the problem is you can't.
It is high risk.
Yeah, it is. I can't predict it, right? I mean, I have no influence on the currency market, or what politicians do and all that, right? And after we had some pluses and some minuses, right? But I still felt that, and I'm fairly a risk taker, right? In most cases, but I'm running a business. I have employees. I felt it's something I have to be protected against, even if I know in some cases I make money, in some cases I lose money, right? But we're not a multinational where we can source in multiple countries and then it sort of all balances out. That just isn't the case.
It's like, you know Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I do know Bitcoin. Yes.
My friend is he's a trader and got mashallah. But I look at it from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If you have enough money or extra money that you really can spend and you don't feel bad if you lose it, it's an opportunity to go in.
Yeah.
This is going to be a risky one if you financially limited and you're going to take that high risk. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, I will argue, I'm not talking about Bitcoin as a personal investment. Then I agree. I mean, that's sort of up to you. I'm talking about running a company, having employees, having customers, right? I mean, there's just certain things I need to do to protect the company and protect the jobs of people who work for me, right? So I think that's a little bit different. And honestly, I know somebody who invested just 4 years ago $10,000 in Bitcoin, and I think it's worth like 5 million or whatever, some crazy amount. Yeah, 10,000. Yeah, yeah. It's multi-million, right? And he's a friend of mine, and he said you should have done it. Yeah, but it's hindsight. It's hindsight, right? It could have gone the other way. I mean, you can't live your life by hindsight, review mirror, right? I mean, that just doesn't work. So I don't beat myself up for that stuff because.
Sometimes I think it's a bit risk taker. And there's certain exercise, like, for example, most business owners do like dropping from high places and they do certain exercise and just remove the fear of risk. And that's helped a lot in the.
Yeah. So that's an interesting. Yeah, these team offsites, right, where you do these group, here you throw somebody in the air, you do bungee jumping. So yeah. So that's interesting. I haven't found it to be helpful at all, but to each his own, right? Anyway, it's a different discussion. I think bungee jumping is just silly, and that's somebody who's climbed big mountains, right? But I feel when I climb big mountains, I'm in control. If I'm jumping on a cord of some crane, I'm not in control. Right? I mean, there's nothing I can do. I'm just hanging on the damn cord, right? So to me, that's a totally different. Maybe, yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm not saying it's sort of right or wrong, right? I mean, if somebody gets a kick out of it, but on an offsite as a team building will make you more of a risk taker by throwing off a bridge. I don't know if that is really the case. So you may be traumatized. So when I was 10 years old, I was in a fair in Germany, right? So we sit on a horse, and as a kid, you go around and around, really, really safe. But I was thrown off. I've never sat on a horse again since then, right? So events can also traumatize you, not just kind of help you. So.